The automatic doors of Mercy Hospital burst open. A young mother, Salamata, ran in from the cold night, her feet completely bare on the polished stone floor. She was clutching her baby son to her chest. The child was limp. His face was a frightening shade of pale, and he was gasping each breath a tiny, weak struggle for air. She rushed to the high marble admissions desk. "Please," she begged, her voice choked with panic. "My baby. He cannot breathe. You must help him." The receptionist looked up slowly, her face showing no emotion. Her voice was just as cold as the marble counter. "What is your form of payment? I will need your insurance card." Salamata's hope shattered. "I have no insurance," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I have no money. I have nothing. Only him. Please, don't you understand? He is dying." And many floors above them, in a quiet room, Pope Leo the 14th was visiting his sick old friend, a cardinal. He was there privately with no fanfare. Suddenly a sound drifted up from the lobby below. It was not a loud noise, but it was sharp with pain, the sound of a mother's desperate cry. The Pope stood up, his face filled with sudden concern, and moved toward his door to listen. "But before we dive in, tell me where you're watching us from. And may God bless you wherever you are. Now let's begin." The receptionist picked up her telephone, her eyes avoiding Salamata's. "I have a situation at the main desk," she said calmly. A moment later, a man in a sharp suit walked out from a back office. He was the night administrator. He walked with purpose. He did not look at the struggling baby. He looked right at Salamata. "Good evening. I understand you are having difficulty with the admission forms," he said. His voice was smooth like polished wood. "This hospital's pediatric intensive care unit is a private facility. We must have a financial guarantee before we can admit a patient." "Guarantee?" Salamata choked on the word. "He is a baby. He needs a doctor, not a guarantee." The administrator held up his hand. "That is the protocol. I cannot break the protocol. If you have no means of payment, I must insist you try the public hospital. It is on the other side of the city, but they should be able to assist you there." The other side of the city. The words hit Salamata like a physical blow. She knew her son did not have that much time. An hour in traffic? He would be gone. This man was sentencing her baby to death, all while smiling politely. Her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, and with a terrible, wailing cry, she gently placed her child on the cold marble ground between her and the administrator. She bowed her head, her body shaking with sobs. "Then let him die here," she wept. "Let him die here where the doctors can see him." It was at that exact moment that the other doctors and nurses in the lobby, who had tried to look away, all froze. A figure had stepped out of the shadows of the far corridor. His white robes seemed to glow in the artificial light. Pope Leo the 14th was walking towards them, and his face was not sad. It was the face of a man who had just seen an unforgivable sin. Pope Leo the 14th walked directly into the center of the confrontation. He stood between the administrator and the weeping mother on the floor. His presence was so unexpected, so powerful, that the entire lobby fell silent. He looked down at the tiny baby, gasping on the cold floor, and his heart clenched. Then he raised his eyes to the man in the suit. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Sir," he asked, "what do you believe you are doing?" The administrator was flustered. He did not recognize the Pope. He just saw an old man in a white robe interfering. "Excuse me, sir," the administrator said, trying to regain control. "This is a confidential hospital matter. I must ask you to step aside." "Step aside," the Pope repeated, his voice hardening. "You are discussing money while a child of God dies on your floor. This is not a confidential matter. This is a moral disgrace." Pope Leo then turned his gaze away from the administrator and scanned the lobby. He saw the chief of emergency medicine, a senior doctor, standing frozen by the nurse's station, watching. The Pope locked eyes with him. "Doctor," he called out, his voice now ringing with authority. "You took an oath. Did you pledge it to a spreadsheet or did you pledge it to God? You will save this child." The administrator sputtered, "But sir, the protocol. We have no guarantee of payment." The Pope turned back to him, his eyes flashing with a holy fire. "You want a guarantee?" he thundered. "I am the guarantee. The Church is the guarantee. But you will not stand there and barter for the life of a child. Not tonight. Not while I am here." He pointed a steady finger at the doctor. "Now, doctor, do your duty." A gasp went through the staff as they finally truly recognized who he was. The administrator's face went white. The doctor, jolted as if by electricity, broke from his freeze. Code Blue. Pediatric trauma team to the lobby. Now. Move. In less than 3 seconds, the lobby was filled with the sound of running feet. A team of nurses and specialists burst through the emergency doors, scooped up the baby and raced back through the doors with Salamata scrambling to follow them. The administrator was left standing alone, speechless, in the middle of the empty, silent floor. The trauma room doors slammed shut, swallowing the medical team and the tiny, struggling baby. The frantic noise was replaced by a heavy, terrible silence. Salamata was left outside in the corridor, alone. She leaned against the wall, her entire body shaking so violently she could barely stand. The administrator approached the Pope, his hands fluttering nervously. "Your Holiness, I had no idea, our protocols." Pope Leo cut him off with a single dismissive glance. He did not waste another word on the man. His only focus was on the mother. He walked over to Salamata. A nurse, seeing him approach, rushed to offer him a comfortable chair. The Pope waved it away. Instead, to the astonishment of everyone left in the hallway, he slowly lowered himself to sit on the cold, sterile floor right beside her. He sat with her in silence for a long moment, simply sharing her vigil. He could see she was freezing, still in her thin, damp clothes from the night outside. He was wearing a heavy dark wool coat over his white robes for his private visit. Without a word, he removed the coat and placed it firmly around her shoulders. It was large and warm, and it smelled faintly of old books and incense. Salamata pulled it tight as if it were a shield, and a new wave of sobs, this time of gratitude and shock, shook her. Inside the trauma room, they could hear the muffled beeps of machines and the urgent, low voices of the medical team fighting for her son's life. "What is your name, my child?" the Pope asked gently. "Salamata," she whispered. "And your son?" "Emmanuel," she said, her voice breaking. "Emmanuel," the Pope repeated, his eyes closing for a moment. "God with us." He then asked her where she lived, where her family was. And as they waited for news, the full, heartbreaking story spilled out. She told him of the abandoned building where she slept. She told him she had not eaten in 2 days, that she had spent her last coins on a bus to get to this hospital because she heard it was the best. The Pope's righteous anger, which had been a hot flame, now settled into a cold, hard resolve. He realized the administrator was just one small part of a much larger, colder sin. The world itself had failed this mother and child, long before this hospital ever did. The minutes dragged into hours. The hospital grew quiet as the deepest part of the night took hold. Each time the emergency room doors opened, Salamata would jump, her heart pounding, only to see a nurse pass by on some other errand. Pope Leo sat with her, a silent, powerful presence in the sterile corridor. He prayed, and his prayers were not just for the child's body but for his future. Finally, just as the first hint of gray light began to touch the windows, the main doctor, the one the Pope had challenged, came out. His face was streaked with sweat, and his surgical mask hung around his neck. He looked utterly exhausted, but he was smiling. He walked directly to Salamata and knelt in front of her. "He is stable," the doctor said, his voice rough with emotion. "He is breathing on his own. The fever is coming down. He is a very, very strong little boy." Salamata collapsed forward, burying her face in her hands as she wept with relief. "Can I see him?" "Yes," the doctor said. "He is in the intensive care unit. He will need to be here for some time, but the worst is over." "Your Holiness," he said, turning to the Pope, you saved him." Pope Leo shook his head. "You and your team saved him, doctor. You did God's work." But as the doctor led the weeping mother away to see her son, Leo the 14th knew his own work was not finished. This victory was meaningless if Salamata and Emmanuel were sent back to the cold streets that had nearly killed them. He stood up, his joints stiff from the cold floor, and found the administrator's now empty office. He sat behind the large, polished desk and picked up the telephone. He did not call the Vatican. He called the bishop of the city. He called the head of a local parish, waking him from his sleep. "Father Michael," the Pope's voice was low but firm, "I have a mother and a child. They have no one and nothing. I'm sending them to you. You will find them a warm room. You will find her work. You will feed them. This is not a request." He made one more call to a charity run by the church. Before Salamata had even finished her first visit with her recovering son, a new life was already being built for them. The Pope was creating the safety net that the world had refused to provide. For 2 days, Salamata sat by the incubator in the pediatric intensive care unit, a place she now had full access to. She watched her son, Emmanuel, sleep. He was no longer a pale, gasping child. His color was returning, his breathing was deep and even. The Pope had made sure she had food and a quiet room to rest, but she barely left the baby's side. On the third morning, as sunlight streamed into the room, Emmanuel's eyes fluttered open. He blinked, adjusting to the light. His gaze moved until it found his mother's face. Salamata leaned in, her tears dropping onto the plastic of the incubator. "Emmanuel," she whispered. "My son." His tiny hand, no longer frail, reached out and his fingers instinctively curled around her own. It was a simple, small movement, but for Salamata, it was the entire world returning to her. The miracle was complete. But outside that peaceful room, the story had taken on a life of its own. It had been impossible to keep such a dramatic event quiet. One of the nurses who had been in the lobby, a woman who had seen the administrator's cold refusal and the Pope's fiery compassion, had gone home and told her husband. "You will not believe what I saw," she'd said. Her husband told his brother, who was a reporter for the city paper. The next day the headline exploded: "The Pope's Guarantee, Leo XIV forces Mercy Hospital TO save dying child." The story was everywhere. It was on the radio, on television, discussed in every cafe and bus stop. It was a story of hope, of justice, of a leader who didn't just talk about compassion, but who showed up on the front lines and demanded it. The hospital, facing a storm of public outrage, went into damage control, releasing statements about their commitment to care. But the public only cared about one thing: the Pope had been there and he had saved a child. His work done, Pope Leo knew it was time to leave. The child was safe and the mother's future was secure. He went to the intensive care unit to say goodbye. Salamata saw him and fell to her knees, holding his hand to her cheek. "Holiness, how can I thank you?" "Stand up, my child," he said softly. "Thank God. And raise your son to be a good man." Salamata looked around, her eyes desperate. She had nothing. She owned nothing in the world to give the man who had saved her world. Then her eyes fell on her son's feet. With trembling hands, she reached into the incubator and gently pulled one tiny, clean sock off Emmanuel's foot. It was small, white, and simple. She held it out to the Pope with both hands as if she were offering a crown. "Please," she whispered. "It is all I have." Pope Leo looked at the tiny sock. He saw the poverty, the humility, and the immense love it represented. He did not refuse it. He did not laugh. He took it with a gentle, profound reverence, as if he were receiving the most precious relic. He held it in the palm of his hand for a moment, then carefully, deliberately, placed it in the pocket of his white cassock. The incident at the hospital was over, but for Pope Leo the 14th, the true battle had just begun. He understood that saving one child was a single vital act, but the system that had almost killed him remained. The tiny sock he had placed on his desk was not a trophy of a battle won. It was a declaration of war against the cold, quiet sin of indifference. That following Sunday the world was watching. The story of the Pope's confrontation had already leaked, and it had electrified the public. The square in front of St. Peter's was not just full, it was overflowing with a crowd that felt a new, urgent energy. They had not come for a routine blessing. They had come for an answer. When Pope Leo appeared at the window, he did not begin with the usual prayers. He was silent for a long, heavy moment, looking over the sea of faces, letting their anticipation build. Then he held up his hand. And clutched in it, for all the world to see, was the tiny, simple white baby sock. A ripple of confusion, then recognition, passed through the crowd. He told them the story. He did not spare them the details. He told them of Salamata's bare feet on the polished marble. He told them of the administrator who looked at a dying child and saw only a financial risk. He told them of the shallow, gasping breaths of a baby named Emmanuel, who was denied help not because of his illness, but because of his poverty. They asked this mother for a financial guarantee, the Pope said, his voice echoing across the square, filled with a deep, sorrowful anger. They asked for an insurance card while a human life, a child of God, faded before their very eyes. They practiced the cold arithmetic of bureaucracy, while our Lord calls for the warm, messy, immediate mercy of the human heart. His voice rose, growing stronger. I say to you today, I say to every hospital director, to every politician, to every one of us who has ever had the luxury of looking away, that a society is judged not by the height of its buildings, but by how it cares for those who are smallest. A hospital is a house of healing, not a bank. It must not have a toll booth at its door. He held the sock high again as if it were a banner. This is the only currency that should matter. The innocence of a child. The desperation of a mother. I give you a new commandment today, one to be written on the hearts of every doctor, every nurse, and every lawmaker. You will say first. The accounting can wait. The protocol can wait. Humanity cannot. The crowd did not just applaud. They roared. People were weeping openly. The speech was broadcast live across the globe, and in the hallways of hospitals everywhere, doctors and nurses gathered in small groups, many of them in tears. They felt a profound collective sense of shame, and at the same time, a new powerful sense of liberation. The Pope had given them permission to be healers again, not gatekeepers. The change was swift. Spurred by the Pope's challenge, the government quickly passed a new national health decree. They called it Emmanuel's Law. It made it a serious crime for any hospital, private or public, to deny emergency life-saving care to any child based on their family's ability to pay. What had been a cold protocol was now a criminal offense. And as for Salamata, she never saw a hospital bill. The parish father Michael took her and Emmanuel in, giving them a small, clean apartment above the church's community hall. She was given a job in the kitchen, and for the first time in her life she had security. She had friends. Emmanuel grew strong and healthy, a bright, happy boy, his laughter echoing in the church courtyard. The world saw the new law. But Pope Leo the 14th, sitting at his ancient desk in the Vatican, saw the true source of the victory. For the rest of his life, that one tiny white baby sock lay on his desk, next to his most important documents. It was a constant, powerful reminder that true authority does not come from a throne or a title, but from the courage to stand in the way of injustice, to speak for those who have no voice, and to prove that one small act of defiant compassion can be enough to change the laws of an entire nation.